There are families that don't fall apart because love runs out. They fall apart because someone chooses the cruelest possible moment to leave. A mother is sitting outside the ER with her little boy, counting every shaky breath, and her husband sends a text as cold as a receipt he's moving to Miami with another woman he drained every dollar they had, and she's on her own. In the middle of fear, betrayal doesn't just break trust, it tries to cut off survival. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're tuning in from. It's always amazing to see where our stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next twist in this journey. Now I'd like to invite you to listen to her confession. The air coming off the Atlantic always turns sharper once the sun drops, and that afternoon in Portland, it carried a cold that cut straight through my sweater. Nico had been chasing a soccer ball across the uneven grass like he always did, arms pumping, cheeks flushed, yelling something about being wide open. I remember thinking I needed to remind him to drink more water. That was the last ordinary thought I had. He slowed first, then he swayed, and then he went down. 1 second he was a 6-year-old boy chasing a pass. The next he was pale against the field eyes, unfocused, his small body too still. I don't remember dropping my purse. I don't remember what I yelled. I just remember lifting him. He felt both too heavy and too light at the same time, and hearing my own voice tell someone to grab his water bottle. The drive to the ER is a blur of red lights I barely registered, and my own voice saying, "Stay with me, Nico. Look at Mom. Look at me." I tried calling Wes on speaker. It rang. It rang again, straight to voicemail. I told myself he was in a meeting, driving, something reasonable. I left one short message. Nico fainted. "I'm taking him to the ER. Call me." The emergency room smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Wheels rolled across tile. Somewhere a monitor beeped in steady rhythm, the sound too calm for how my chest felt. They took Nico back quickly. An IV line taped to his small arm. Cartoon dinosaurs looping silently on a ceiling-mounted screen meant to distract kids from pain. A nurse asked me questions. I answered automatically. Age, allergies, insurance, while watching his chest rise and fall, like that movement was the only proof the world was still intact. "It doesn't look immediately life-threatening," the doctor said after a quick exam. "Possibly dehydration compounded by a mild infection. We'll run labs and keep him for observation." Observation. The word felt like a suspended sentence. Nico's eyes fluttered open. His voice was thin. "Is Dad coming?" I smoothed his hair back, careful not to disturb the IV line. "He's busy right now. Mom's here." It was the only answer I could give without letting something break. A clipboard appeared in my hands. Consent forms, insurance authorizations. My signature felt heavier than usual, like each letter required more effort than it should. Halfway through signing my name, Callista Vane, my phone buzzed in my palm. Wes. For one foolish second, relief washed through me. He's finally checking in. He's asking about Nico. I opened the message. "I'm moving to Miami with her. I took all our savings. You're on your own." 3 sentences, all caps, clean, final. My pen dragged a crooked line across the page. I didn't scream. I didn't drop the phone. I didn't even reread it right away. I stood there frozen in a fluorescent hallway with my son on a hospital bed 10 feet away, and I felt something inside me lock into place. Nico shifted and looked at me. "Mom." I looked at his face, too pale, too small in that oversized hospital bed, and I forced my breathing to match his. I typed back 2 words, "Good luck." I didn't ask who her was. I didn't call him. I didn't demand an explanation. I was in an ER with my child. I didn't have the luxury of collapsing. What struck me wasn't just what he wrote. It was when he chose to write it. He sent that text while I was standing beside our son in a hospital hallway, while I was signing medical consent forms, while I couldn't leave, while any emotional reaction could be labeled unstable. And after that message, there was nothing. No follow-up, no apology, no clarification, no frantic call saying he'd lost his mind. Just silence. That silence told me more than the text itself. This wasn't an impulse. This was execution. I went back to Nico's bedside and took his hand. I focused on the monitor's steady beep. I focused on the warmth of his fingers wrapped around mine. I told myself one thing very clearly. If he was moving to Miami, he wasn't just taking money, he was taking a narrative. I didn't check the bank account in that hallway. I didn't need to. I already knew this message wasn't just about leaving, it was about cutting oxygen. And I was still standing. They discharged Nico just after midnight. Hydration, rest, and keep an eye on his fever, the doctor said. Follow up with your pediatrician. I nodded like someone who had slept in the last 24 hours. Outside the parking lot was washed in sodium lights. The cold felt sharper now. Nico leaned against my shoulder, half asleep, his weight grounding me in a way nothing else could. I buckled him into his booster seat, carefully tightening the straps with mechanical precision. Click, tug, check. Routine is stabilizing. I sat behind the wheel and finally opened the banking alert. Transfer completed, $184,612.37. Available balance $0. For a moment, my brain did what it does at work when a system crashes. It looked for error codes. Server lag, delayed refresh. I pulled down to refresh. 0. Again. 0. The number didn't flicker. It didn't hesitate. It just existed. I drove home slowly. Every red light felt deliberate, like the world was stretching time to see what I would do with it. At home, I carried Nico inside, set a glass of water on his nightstand, lined up the medicine the nurse had given me, and waited until his breathing evened out before leaving his room. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, staring at the framed photos along the wall, beach trips, birthday candles, Wes's arm around my waist. I wondered which smiles were rehearsed. Then I opened my laptop. If panic is noise, data is clarity. Checking account, a few $100s left in a linked subaccount. Mortgage auto draft scheduled in 9 days. Utilities pending. School tuition invoice due at the end of the month. I logged into our retirement portal. A withdrawal notification blinked at the top of the screen. The maximum allowable amount had been taken from Wes's side of the account. Not everything, penalties and limits, stopped that, but enough to sting. I sat back in my chair, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly too loud. I had let Wes organize the money in our marriage. He liked spreadsheets. He talked about diversification and long-term strategy. I handled systems at work. He handled finances at home. It felt efficient, modern. I knew server loads and infrastructure limits better than I knew the exact breakdown of our liquid assets. That realization felt more dangerous than the zero. My phone vibrated before dawn. Judith, my mother-in-law, did not ask about Nico. "What have you done?" she demanded without greeting. "Excuse me, Wes says you've been volatile lately." Unpredictable. He didn't feel safe. Safe. The word was placed carefully. He left while our son was in the ER, I said evenly. He left because he had to protect himself, she replied. You've been under stress. You've been difficult. He needed space. Space. He took all our money. He needed resources, she said. You make good money. You'll recover. The conversation was not about my child. It was about my character. The language she used wasn't emotional. It was clinical, volatile, unsafe, protect. It sounded like something drafted for a filing not spoken by a grandmother. An email came in mid-morning from a law firm I didn't recognize. Subject line, Vane versus Vane. I opened it. Wes had filed for divorce. Temporary orders requested. Custody arrangements pending. Allegations of emotional instability affecting the child's environment. The timestamp made my stomach turn. The petition had been filed days before the ER, before the text, before Miami. The ER wasn't the beginning. It was the final scene of something already in motion. He hadn't texted me from a place of chaos. He had texted me from a place of strategy. I scrolled through the document again, slower this time. Phrases jumped out at me. Emotional volatility, erratic behavior, need for stability. They were building a version of me, and if I reacted loudly enough, I would fit inside it. That was the real trap. I wasn't just losing money. I was losing room to respond. Judith didn't once ask if Nico was okay. She asked who I was becoming in other people's eyes. That told me everything. I opened a new folder on my desktop. Evidence. I saved the text from Wes. I saved the email from the law firm. I screenshotted the bank transfer. I archived Judith's messages. From this point forward, every word mattered. Every silence mattered more. I looked down the hallway toward Nico's room. The door was slightly open. I could see the faint glow of his nightlight against the wall. Wes hadn't just moved to Miami with her. He was trying to move the case there too, to shift jurisdiction, to drag this out of Maine and into a place where he believed he had control. He thought I was alone. What he didn't understand yet was that I work in systems, and systems leave logs. If he wanted to turn my life into a case file, I would learn the format faster than he expected, and I would not be the one caught unprepared. By the time the sun came up over Portland Harbor, I had 3 goals and no room for confusion. First, Nico stays here. He stays in his school, his room, his routine. No sudden relocation. No disruption dressed up as opportunity. Second, I do not give Wes the performance he's hoping for. I will not become the unstable mother they've already started drafting in legal language. Third, I find out where the money went and who her really is, but I do it without detonating my own position. I scheduled a consultation with Ruth Maddox the next morning. Her office sat above a small bakery in Old Port, the kind with fogged windows and handwritten chalk menus. The smell of fresh bread drifted up the stairwell, warm and human, a strange contrast to what I was carrying in my bag: printed bank statements, screenshots, the divorce petition, and the 3-line text that split my life in 2. Ruth's office was compact and precise. Clean desk, organized files, no wasted motion. She didn't offer sympathy first. She offered structure. Start at the beginning, she said. Timeline only, no commentary. So I did. When Wes started coming home later, when he insisted on consolidating accounts for transparency, when he began handling more of the transfers, who schedules Nico's doctor appointments, who packs his lunch, who does pick-up and drop-off, whether there were any documented incidents of instability, any police reports, medical records, complaints from school. There were none. Has anyone ever formally raised concerns about your parenting? She asked. No. Any history of mental health intervention? No. She nodded and flipped a page. Then what we have right now is language, not proof. She tapped the divorce filing. And language can be constructed. I leaned back in my chair, letting that settle. Constructed, not discovered. Then she pointed to something else. He moved to Miami, you said. Yes. Do you know if he's planning to stay? He said he's moving there. Ruth paused. That's not just a romantic decision. I felt something tighten in my chest. What do you mean it's a jurisdiction move? If he establishes residency in Florida and argues for relocation based on employment or stability, he may try to shift aspects of the case there. It's called forum shopping. Choosing the battlefield. The word battlefield didn't feel dramatic. It felt accurate. You're telling me Miami isn't just about her. I'm telling you, Ruth said calmly, that Miami could be about leverage. I replayed the text in my mind. I'm moving to Miami with her. I took all our savings. You're on your own. On your own. It wasn't just abandonment. It was exhaustion by design. Drain the resources. Force me into financial panic. Make me reactive. Let me look unstable while he looks like he's rebuilding. He filed before he texted, I said quietly. Ruth's eyes flicked up. Yes. He planned this. Yes. She folded her hands. Now we need to see how deep the planning goes. She reviewed the public disclosures attached to the filing. Something bothered her. The asset picture feels incomplete, she said. This is structured as if your joint accounts were the primary source of liquidity, but the withdrawals suggest something else might be in play. Like what? Does his family have a trust, a family fund, anything designed to shield or distribute assets? I opened my mouth to say no. Then I stopped. A memory surfaced. Judith at Thanksgiving 2 years ago, speaking in vague but pointed tones about protecting generational wealth. Wes insisting we merge accounts shortly after framing it as partnership. Transparency, efficiency. I don't know for sure, I admitted, but it wouldn't surprise me. Ruth nodded slowly. If there's structured money behind him that changes the narrative entirely, it means he's not escaping, he's executing. The room felt colder despite the bakery downstairs. "What do I do?" I asked. "You do not confront him," she said firmly. "You do not accuse, you gather." She slid a yellow legal pad toward me. "Pull 12 to 24 months of statements, every account you have access to. We're looking for patterns, not just large transfers, small, consistent ones. That's how people move money quietly." As she spoke, pieces began aligning in my head. The short business trips, the late meetings, the nights he came home smelling like airport air and expensive cologne. If Miami was a trap, it had been set long before the ER, and the real war hadn't started in a hospital hallway. It had started in documents. File immediately to maintain jurisdiction in Maine. Ruth continued, "Your son lives here, goes to school here, medical providers here. That matters. And the money we move to freeze what we can. If we detect a pattern, we petition for forensic accounting." Forensic accounting. The phrase didn't scare me. It steadied me. When I left her office, the smell of bread hit me again. Life was continuing. People were ordering coffee, laughing, carrying paper bags of pastries down the street. Wes thought he'd pushed me into isolation. But the moment I turned everything into documentation, he stepped into a system that doesn't run on emotion. If he believed Miami was a clean exit, he hadn't considered what happens when someone follows the logs. And if she was stepping into that city expecting open accounts and easy access, she might soon discover something different. The next morning, I woke before Nico did. I prepared his medication at the kitchen counter while my laptop booted up. The house was quiet except for the hum of the heater and the faint cry of gulls outside. Stability is built from small things: water measured precisely, thermometer readings logged, breakfast on time. Then I opened the bank portal. I followed Ruth's instructions exactly. No messages, no accusations, no emotional replies, just data. I downloaded every statement available, checking savings-linked accounts stretching back 2 years. I organized them by month. Then I filtered. Large transfers first, then medium, then small. It took hours. At first, everything looked ordinary: mortgage, utilities, tuition, insurance. Then I saw it. A transfer that didn't belong. It wasn't large enough to raise suspicion on its own. A few thousand here, a few thousand there. Consistent intervals, clean descriptions that could pass for consulting fees or business expenses. I created a spreadsheet and listed every occurrence. The pattern formed quickly. It wasn't one dramatic withdrawal. It was a slow bleed. I cross-referenced dates. Several transfers aligned with weekends Wes claimed to be traveling. Others matched evenings he said he'd be working late. My stomach turned not from heartbreak, but from recognition. He hadn't just been lying emotionally. He had been scheduling financial movement alongside physical absence. I copied the name of the receiving entity and searched it in Florida's business registry. It took less than 5 minutes. The LLC was registered in Miami. The listed managing member wasn't Wes, it was her. A full legal name, an address, a filing date that predated the ER. Her was no longer a pronoun in a text message. She existed in public records. And our marital funds had been flowing into her company months before I stood under fluorescent lights signing hospital forms. I leaned back and let the implications settle. This wasn't a man who snapped and ran. This was someone who constructed an exit. I documented everything. Screenshots with timestamps, PDF copies of statements, highlighted transaction lines. I built a 2-column timeline, family events on the left, financial transfers on the right, ER visit, final large withdrawal, business trip, recurring transfer, late meeting, LLC deposit. The overlap was undeniable. Before sending anything to Ruth, I made sure my notes were factual, no adjectives, no conclusions, just evidence. I emailed the file with a simple subject line, pattern identified. 10 minutes later, a new email arrived from Wes's attorney. They wanted to expedite the temporary custody hearing in the best interest of the child. I stared at the timing. They were accelerating, which meant something had shifted. They didn't know exactly what I had found, but they sensed resistance. I didn't respond directly. I forwarded it to Ruth. Then I opened a fresh document. Nico care log, medication times, school absence notes, doctor follow-ups, daily activities, every detail that established continuity, because if they were going to argue instability, I was going to present consistency. By that evening, my dining table had transformed into a command center. Legal pads, highlighters, folders neatly labeled. I looked at the spreadsheet again. Wes hadn't emptied the account in a single dramatic act. He'd been siphoning it for months. The ER was simply the moment he closed the valve. I no longer cared why he did it. Why is emotional? How is structural? And structure leaves fingerprints. If money had been moving to Florida long before the text message, then moving to Miami with her wasn't a spontaneous escape. It was the final step in a written sequence, which meant somewhere in those records, somewhere beyond what I had already found, there would be the formal mechanism that made it all possible. And I intended to find it. The more I reviewed the transfers, the clearer one thing became. This wasn't just about Wes slipping money out of our joint accounts. There was infrastructure behind him, structure, reinforcement, which meant if I wanted to understand how deep this went, I had to look somewhere I had avoided since the night he left his home office. The room still smelled faintly like his cologne and printer toner. The desk was orderly in a way that felt deliberate, not casual. Filing cabinet locked. A bookshelf lined with tax guides and estate planning manuals. It struck me how much of our marriage had existed inside this room without me fully entering it. I didn't go in there to snoop. I went in there because survival outranks discomfort. Ruth's voice echoed in my head. Look for what he didn't think you'd check. Not hidden safes, not secret drives, the things that felt safe enough to leave behind. I started with the file cabinet. The top drawer held tax returns and routine documents. The second drawer had a section labeled Miscellaneous. Miscellaneous is where people store what they don't categorize, not what they fear. I pulled the folder out and sat on the floor. Inside were printed emails, financial summaries, statements I hadn't seen before. One email subject line stopped me cold. Trust Distribution, Q3. I read it once. Then again. The email chain was between Judith and a wealth management firm I recognized from a Christmas card she once bragged about receiving. The tone was professional, restrained, deliberate. Quarterly distribution schedule confirmed. Asset protection strategy intact. Relocation timing considerations discussed. Relocation. The word wasn't romantic, it was procedural. Judith's name appeared clearly in the signature block. Trustee. Wes was copied on several messages. One of the emails referenced maintaining flexibility during temporary geographic transitions to preserve favorable positioning. That wasn't the language of heartbreak. That was the language of planning. My hands stayed steady as I continued reading. They discussed distribution amounts and figures that dwarfed the transfers I had been tracking from our joint account. If those funds were accessible to Wes in some form, then the image he was constructing of a man escaping instability with only what he could salvage was fiction. This wasn't a desperate exit. It was financed. And Judith wasn't just a concerned mother backing her son emotionally. She was managing a resource that could fund attorneys' relocation and pressure. The trust wasn't theoretical. It had a schedule, a manager, a paper trail, which meant it had vulnerability. I took photos of every page with my phone, making sure the timestamps were visible in the frame. I saved them immediately into a folder I labeled with Precision Trust _email _Q 3 _date. I replaced the papers exactly as I found them. Same order, same alignment in the folder. No sign I had touched anything. When I left the room, I felt something I hadn't felt since the ER. Not relief, clarity. I emailed Ruth a single line, found trust emails. Judith is trustee, Wes copied. She responded within minutes. Do not engage them. Filing adjustments now. That afternoon, a message came from Judith. The tone had shifted. Callista, we need to lower the temperature for Nico's sake. This doesn't have to become ugly. Ugly, not unstable, not unsafe. The vocabulary had softened. They sensed pressure. An hour later, an email arrived from Wes's attorney. They encouraged cooperation to prevent unnecessary escalation. If I failed to engage constructively, they would pursue emergency custody measures to protect the child from further instability. The threat was wrapped in civility. I read it twice. They wanted me emotional, defensive, reactive. Instead, I opened a new document, narrative log. I began recording their language, dates, phrases repeated, when the word unstable appeared, when unsafe appeared, when urgency increased, when tone softened. Every acceleration of legal pressure corresponded to something I had discovered. The marriage I thought I was in had long ago been converted into documentation. I just hadn't known it. Miami wasn't where this began. It was where they believed it would end cleanly. But if trust distributions had been moving quarterly, and if marital funds had been flowing into Florida for months, then the next step was obvious. Freeze, disclose, subpoena. And once the money was forced into daylight, her would not be able to stand comfortably in shadow. The shift from collecting to acting felt different. There's a moment when evidence stops being information and starts becoming leverage. Ruth scheduled a meeting early the next morning. Her office looked the same as always, organized, calm, but the energy in the room was more focused. "We filed to maintain jurisdiction in Maine immediately," she said. "Your son resides here. School records, medical records, community ties. That anchors the case." She slid documents across the desk. "Simultaneously, we request a temporary asset freeze covering joint accounts and any entities reasonably linked to marital funds." She glanced at the trust emails. "And we demand full financial disclosure, including trust structures relevant to distributions that may impact the marital estate." The language was precise, clinical. I provided everything in structured packets. Recurring transfer spreadsheet, Florida LLC registration listing her name, trust email chain showing quarterly distributions and Judith's role. ER discharge papers, school absence note, calendar log showing I handled daily care. By the time I left her office, the filings were already in motion. The courthouse process felt bureaucratic and slow on the surface. Forms, deadlines, clerk windows, stamped pages. But beneath it, something irreversible had begun. 2 days later, the court granted a temporary order preserving Maine jurisdiction and partially freezing certain assets pending disclosure. I didn't celebrate. I exhaled. And then the reaction came. Wes's attorney filed a motion for hardship modification almost immediately. They argued that the asset freeze was impairing Wes's ability to meet living expenses in Miami, the city that was supposed to represent freedom. If his relocation was self-sufficient, why did it depend on unfrozen funds? In one of their financial affidavits, a line item appeared referencing shared housing contribution. The recipient was no longer invisible. Her name surfaced in connection with expenses, support, contribution. The narrative that she was unrelated to the financial structure began to erode under its own paperwork. Then came a text from an unfamiliar number. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'd like to talk." Woman to woman. No name. But I knew. It was her. The message was designed to draw me into unsupervised dialogue, to provoke emotion, to create a record. I didn't respond. I forwarded it to Ruth. Minutes later, Judith called. Her tone was softer than I had ever heard. "This is hurting, Nico," she said. "We can find a peaceful path." The change wasn't compassion. It was calculation. The freeze had touched something real. I stayed steady. All communication through counsel. At home, I maintained rhythm. Medication schedule posted on the fridge, school communication documented, work email confirming adjusted hours to accommodate Nico's recovery. I created a binder labeled Care Records, Inside ER Report, Pediatrician Follow-Up, Attendance Log, Daily Notes. If they wanted to question my stability, they would have to do it against a wall of consistency. I did not feel victorious. I felt grounded. For the first time since the ER, the floor beneath me wasn't shifting. But I understood something clearly. A freeze is not a conclusion. It is pressure. And pressure forces movement. If the money in Miami tightened, they would not sit quietly. They would either escalate directly toward my role as a mother or reveal more of the structure they had been protecting. Either way, the next move would expose them further. And this time, I would be ready. The morning of the hearing, I wore the same navy blazer I'd worn to every major presentation at work. Structured, neutral, no drama. Ruth had me in her office an hour early. We reviewed everything again, not emotionally but mechanically. Timeline first, the ER, the text message, the filing date that predated the hospital visit, the recurring transfers to the Florida LLC, the trust emails with quarterly distributions, my care log for Nico. Short answers, Ruth reminded me. Direct, no commentary. If they push you, you don't fill silence. I nodded. I had rehearsed one sentence for the accusation that had hovered over me since this began. I have no documented history of instability, and I have consistently provided daily care for my son. That was it. No defense speech, no indignation. The courthouse in Cumberland County felt smaller than I expected. Beige walls, low ceilings, fluorescent lighting, everything ordinary which made the stakes feel sharper. Wes appeared on a large screen seated somewhere in Miami. Clean shirt, composed expression. He looked rested. I noticed that. His attorney began first. They painted a careful portrait. I had been under strain, difficult to live with, emotionally reactive. Wes, they said, had removed himself to create safety and space. Miami was presented as a fresh start, an opportunity for employment stability. Florida jurisdiction was requested as a practical adjustment. Judith's affidavit echoed the same phrases. Concerned grandmother, stability for Nico, mother overwhelmed. It was rehearsed language, polished, repeated. When it was our turn, Ruth didn't argue emotionally. She walked the court through dates. Petition filed on this date, she said calmly. Prior to the emergency room incident. She entered the text message into the record. The judge read it silently. Ruth continued. Defendant withdrew $184,612.37 the night his child was admitted to the ER. We have documentation of recurring transfers to a Florida LLC in the months preceding this event. She submitted the spreadsheet. And we have evidence of a family trust with quarterly distributions in which Judith Vane serves as trustee, and Mr. Vane was copied on distribution communications. The courtroom felt still. The judge leaned forward slightly. Counsel, he said to Wes's attorney, who is the managing member of this Florida LLC. There was a pause. Her name was spoken out loud for the first time in that room. Not her. A full legal name. It shifted something. No longer abstract, no longer personal gossip. It was a financial entity connected to marital funds. Wes's attorney attempted to frame the LLC as unrelated to the marital estate. But when pressed on the timing of deposits and relocation expenses, small inconsistencies appeared. One expense listed in their hardship filing matched a recurring transfer amount I had documented months earlier. Ruth didn't raise her voice. She simply pointed to the alignment. Your Honor, the amounts coincide. The judge looked back at the screen where Wes sat. Why the judge asked plainly, is Florida jurisdiction being requested when the child resides, attends school, and receives medical care in Maine, and when the petitioner relocated immediately following significant asset withdrawal? The silence from Miami stretched half a second too long. Wes answered with generalities about opportunity and stress. It sounded thinner in a courtroom than it had in text messages. The judge did not rule dramatically. He ruled deliberately. Temporary jurisdiction would remain in Maine. The asset freeze would be extended within reasonable scope, pending further disclosure. Full financial disclosure would be required, including trust-related distributions and any entity receiving marital funds. Temporary custody would preserve Nico's stability in Maine. No relocation, no abrupt changes. When we stepped out of the courtroom, I didn't feel triumph. I felt the weight shift. That afternoon, Wes emailed in a different tone. Let's resolve this privately. Let's not escalate. The urgency had softened. I did not respond directly. Everything went through Ruth. The hearing had revealed something important. This was not a battle of volume. It was a matter of alignment, one misplaced figure, one poorly timed filing, one unsteady explanation, and the structure behind Miami began to show its outline. At home, Nico asked if court meant he had to move. No, I said. "You're staying right here." He nodded, satisfied with that answer. I watched him return to his coloring book, steady as ever. The courtroom wasn't about winning, it was about exposure. And exposure changes leverage. The next step would be quieter: forensic review, trust audit. Miami had started to strain, but strain leads to fracture. And fractures reveal what pressure has been holding together. The forensic report arrived in a sealed envelope at Ruth's office 3 weeks later. She didn't dramatize it. She handed it to me and waited while I read. The findings were clinical. Recurring transfers from the marital checking account into the Florida LLC over a period of 9 months. Amounts consistent enough to establish pattern. Evidence of commingling between marital funds and expenses tied to Wes's relocation. Quarterly trust distributions confirmed, not directly deposited into our joint account, but available as supplemental liquidity in proximity to major transfers. In other words, the exit had been financed in layers, not desperation, preparation. Ruth filed a motion compelling expanded disclosure based on the report. The hardship motion from Miami was amended twice within 10 days. Each revision softened prior claims. Each revision revealed dependency. Judith stopped calling. Her silence was louder than her accusations had been. Wes changed tactics. Instead of legal threats, he sent personal messages. "I miss Nico. Remember when we took him to Acadia? I never wanted this to get ugly. He tried to open a door without lawyers present. I didn't step through it. The court issued a more defined temporary order. Primary custody remained with me. Visitation for Wes would occur under structured conditions contingent upon compliance with financial disclosure. Jurisdiction remained in Maine. Entities linked to marital funds were required to continue providing documentation. Then came the proposal. Wes offered to settle quickly, partial repayment of withdrawn funds, agreement not to pursue certain financial inquiries further, a mutual non-disparagement clause. It was framed as peace, but the subtext was clear. He wanted the digging to stop. Ruth looked at me. "This is not generosity," she said. I already knew. If he were confident the structure behind Miami would withstand examination, he wouldn't be rushing toward compromise. I declined the shortcut, not out of revenge, out of principle. At home, life took on a new rhythm. Nico's schedule stabilized. Follow-up appointments confirmed he was fine. School resumed normally. I adjusted my work hours, permanently formalized through HR, documented and clean. The binder labeled care records grew thicker. The financial folder grew thicker too. But the panic was gone. Evidence no longer felt like a weapon. It felt like insulation, protection. The final temporary hearing in that phase was uneventful compared to the first. The judge reaffirmed stability, reinforced disclosure requirements, and maintained asset preservation. Miami was no longer a place of escape. It was a place referenced in affidavits, footnotes, receipts. When I walked out of court that day, I didn't feel victorious. I felt anchored. The question that had haunted me in the ER, why, no longer mattered. The better question had replaced it. How do I protect my son? So no one else writes his story without me. Wes had believed I would unravel under pressure. He believed exhaustion would make me err. He believed isolation would silence me. He underestimated something simple. Systems are stronger than spectacle, and discipline outlasts performance. Nico is still in Maine. Wes remains bound by disclosure and structure. Miami exists now as a ledger entry, not a dream. When someone leaves with the money and a prepared narrative, they're betting on chaos. I didn't win because I was louder. I didn't win because I was stronger. I won because I refused to let anyone else control the pace of my breathing, especially when my son needed me steady enough to breathe with him. When everything falls apart in a single message, we often think the loudest reaction is the strongest one. But tonight, what we've seen is something quieter. Sometimes strength is choosing to stay steady when chaos would be easier. Sometimes dignity is simply breathing through the moment and protecting what truly matters. As we sit with this story, maybe we realize something about ourselves too. We can't always control who leaves what they take or how they rewrite the past, but we can choose how we stand in the present. Not with revenge, not with noise, with clarity, with boundaries, with a heart that refuses to harden. If this story spoke to you in any way, you're always welcome here. Subscribe if you'd like to be part of a space where we listen, reflect, and grow together. And if you feel comfortable, leave a few lines in the comments about what stayed with you. Someone out there might need to read your words. Thank you for spending this time with us. Take care of yourself, take care of the people you love, and I'll see you in the next story.